through those plans now and recognising there is probably up to 3 years' work in this, even in these enabling works contracts we're just about to commence. So there's a lot of time and water to go under the bridge before we actually reinstate the street, and certainly it's the concepts that we're working up there now certainly have an attractive feel to them.
Good. Okay. Good question, and we'll get more back on that. Councillor George.
Yeah, thank you. We've just got a few questions. On page 57 of the agenda, there's the completion date of major interventions of the APTN. And there's a couple there that I'm just a bit curious about. Well, first of all, is the Northwestern Busway. It's 2025 to 2035. I just wonder if that is correct, because it was, the Mayor said it was going up to the top of the priority list. Well, I don't think that's anywhere near the top of the priority list at 2025 to 2035. But the other one which is really curious to me is the additional Waitemata Harbour crossing, which is 2035 to 2045. Now, you know, the government's indicated that it's going to be between 2025 and 2030 that it'll be needed. So I do think that has to be really updated, because this document as it stands isn't accurate. And I'm not going to support a document which isn't accurate, because if you sign up to this, you'll be signing away the fact that these projects are going to be done in specific time frames. So, you know, well, what are we going to do about that? Because I'm not going to support this today if that's...
Can you? Okay. Steve,
through you, Chair, at the moment, though, that is accurate. So this foundation report is a current state description of the 3-decade plan, and it's about completion date. Okay, so don't read additional Waitemata Harbour crossing as necessarily not starting until 2035. It's about the completion date.
Well, and that's not correct as the completion date either, because we're told it's going to be needed at the outside 2030.
And so what we're doing in ATAP is testing these out. Well, and what the Mayor's indicating is that the Northwestern Busway is a large investment that has been evaluated to be brought forward as one of the different investment interventions that ATAP might recommend. So all of what this is describing for you is the current state. It's not what ATAP is necessarily going to recommend to the ministers and the governing body on completion.
Okay, well, let's hope that is correct, because Auckland has kind of given assurances in the past, and you know, what we expected were going to happen, and it was the government that actually has said 2025 to 2030 you'll need a new additional Waitemata Harbour crossing, and reading this document, that's not what we're getting. But anyway, can I just ask, I'm curious to know whether the preliminary work that you're doing, or I don't know what it's called, it's preliminary work between Britomart and Wyndham Street, is that going to be put into the whole CRL project? It's about $270 million, I understand. Will that be part of the CRL project, which the government will come on board with and will reimburse us once it's been completed?
That's certainly the intention. The work that's going on there now is really just the construction of the tunnel.
Yeah. And
if you recall, when that was put before council as an initiative, it was in a climate of uncertainty as to when, if ever, the government was going to come on board. The 2020 was still hanging out there. Yeah. And short of putting the city on hold until that time, I think the council supported that as a piece of early work to get it underway. We won't be running trains through that. It'll only be when the rest of the project is finished that we'll be, as part of that second lot of construction, that we'll actually be fitting out the tunnel. To work there. So, and the idea was to get out of the downtown area, which, as you know, is a very congested spot, if there was any sense that the government approval of the project was going to be delayed. and I think it's actually been very effective as a move to get the project
Well,
advanced.
That could really change our long-term plan, because I think in the long-term plan, we haven't indicated that that's the case. So if that is the case, the government's going to come on board. I think the sooner we can get that in there and update the long-term plan showing that the government will contribute that their 75% of the 271 million. That'd be really helpful if they do put in 75%, like Winston Peters was saying.
Yeah, well,
so,
that'd be nice.
So anyway, that'll be good, and I'll watch this space.
So those discussions are just warming up. That's,
Well, yeah, I hope they are warm. They warm up, and they warm up in our favour, because the government's been let off the hook considerably if we don't get recompense from the government for that work that's happening now.
Yeah.
The other thing is the EMUs, the additional EMUs. Now, is it 30 EMUs have been cut out of the budget at $330 million. That was the amount that was cut out for EMUs. And we had Auckland Transport come in the other day to a workshop, and they said, well, you know, that's a bit of a risk we've taken, and they could be required sooner than later. Were the government going to contribute in the same way for those EMUs? That
EMU timing is one, you're correct in that when that was looked at a while ago, there's a piece of work going on now where we continue to assess the rate of growth of the rail, and it's, I guess you might look at that as being a victim of its, of its own success, because we continually need to look at what is almost an explosive growth of patronage there. So you're correct in that when that was, there was quite a lot of work done probably a couple of years ago, looking at when those extra trains would be needed, and that we were looking at the later half of the next decade as when they were needing. But we continue to, and you'd expect us to be looking at that, just to see whether that was, whether we were kidding ourselves or whether that was still the case. So the indications are, and if you plot the rapid growth we've had over the last couple of years, we're looking to say, well, actually, we need to start preparing for a procurement of more trains. You don't ring up one day and say, well, I have a new set of trains. There's some years involved in that process. So we're looking at that, when they would need to come on board. Yeah. But the budget certainly recognised that there was a parking, if you like, of that element of the overall project budget. It's identified, so it's not a question of hiding everything. It's just moved out, and the timing of that was being geared to match the requirement.
Okay, because I was interested when I saw that they had been canned, and I thought, well, gosh, that doesn't give us any kind of leeway in the future if patronage really does pick up to the extent that we're talking about. And now I think you can hear people saying there's only 3-car trains running on the Western line, and there's not enough capacity in some of those trains when they get close to the city, which I think is something which we really need to keep the eye on the ball there. And the last one is bus systems. 78% of the people still use buses to public transport, and my concern is putting in temporary shelters of a reasonable standard at these new bus stops, because people aren't going to tolerate having to stand out in the rain when the winter comes around. But I can say in Wellesley Street, where the North Shore Express buses run from, there's no shelters, and it's a pretty bleak kind of environment. There's no electronic signs showing when the buses are going to be arriving. So I would hope that that can be improved, because it's going to be in that state for quite some time. And the same down at the bottom of Albert Street, where the Northern Express is going to be working from. I would hope that we're going to be getting shelters there to give people the ability to get out of the rain, wind, and that when it's inclement weather.
Yeah, we've got a group working through those at the moment, because we're going to be doing some more bus shifts in the middle of April, 2 or 3 weeks away. So there's discussions going on there now with the Adshore crowd and all of those people to move, excuse me, to move the buses for that next phase, because that will involve getting the buses out of Queen Street, Lower Queen Street, so that construction work can start there.
Okay, thank you.
Very good, Councillor George. Councillor Bill.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Chris. I've got one question and a comment, if I can, sir.
Yep.
The question is, Chris, the Mayor spoke about the 124 odd projects, 6 billion over the next 6 years. Just the complexity of the work with the CRL once we're past the enabling, the number of actual work programs, if you like, different spheres of work to deliver that project. For instance, if you take the 3-laning of the extensions from Hill Road down to Takini and the interchange, there's 24 separate projects there, each being delivered simultaneously or as close enough as we can be. So the complexities of this tunnelling work, the stations, how many different projects are operating and going to be happening simultaneously or thereabouts?
I don't know what the total number is, and you're certainly correct in terms of the impact of a lot of simultaneous construction. If your question is sort of thinking about resourcing, we've just completed a month of industry engagement with the construction industry from around the world, sharing our views of how we might construct and package the project. And there is clearly a strong interest from internationally, from tunnellers and rail systems people. Tunnelling is obviously being done in New Zealand, but from the rail systems, and there's a lot of activity happening in Australia at the moment. My former projects in Sydney, they're hitting the straps about the same time, so there will be a competition for resource. But I have to say I was pleasantly surprised by the number of international constructors and tunnellers who are sort of fighting for the work that's in Australia at the moment, and there's a clear interest that they are wanting to participate. All of the major local contractors here have an intention of partnering with people overseas, so it is an international project. It's nothing that we're looking to do in our own backyard or from our own backyard.
Certainly the scale of the CRL plus the other transport modes is going to be massive, like this country's never seen. Are we looking at doing 24/7 work on these projects?
Some elements will be. Others, if you recognise, if you do projects of this sort, of the size in the city, that we've had to, as part of our consenting process, be obliged to maintain some fairly strict noise and vibration criteria for the community we're working there. We've got active work management plans that we've prepared as part of that initial approval. The contractors that we've got on board now, a large part of that work is the detailed construction consenting, because we're having to be mindful of the fact we're doing this in people's neighbourhood, and there will be disruption. You might argue if you were in some other regime where you could just let loose, you'd probably get things done a bit quicker, but we have to recognise the territory that we're working in.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I guess that's the compromise, isn't it? You can do a project quicker if you completely disrupt an environment massively or shut it out.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, you know. Would you shut the motorway from Hill Road to Takini to get the job going 24/7? And what disruptions would that cause, because there's no other modes? Can you shut the centre of Auckland down to hurry a project up, and there's no alternative for other modes of transport? So it's always a balancing act, and it's a very difficult one at that.
I guess a very good illustration of that is the very detailed work we've had to go through in the staging of the connection of the City Rail link with the North Auckland line at Mount Eden, where we have to keep a transport service running there. So we're going to be looking at running single line running, so you actually got to look at how do you maintain that frequency of service without overly complicating and restricting the construction work, because you want, ideally you'd shut it and you get on to do it. So all of those things are being teased out and optimised with the team.
And they add
the
time,
moment.
add cost, don't they?
That's right.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Bill. Councillor Dick.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, Chris, I suppose we're in a pretty good position right now because of the historic low interest rates. Is that helping at all in terms of financing of the project, or is that something that's already been put in place?
No, the financing is in place. Low interest always helps.
But that's, so we are being helped by low interest at the moment on this project.
As all of our funding is obviously being secured through council, so those same principles apply. Yeah.
Right. At some years ago, when this has been a controversial project, I suppose, but there was talk about private public partnership. Is there any private funding in this project at all?
Not in the. It's not been contemplated for the project as such, but with each of the station designs, we've had done a lot of look, and in fact future-proofed each of the of the station facility buildings for development either over, above or alongside. So that, for example, outside Albert Street, the Glengarry site, the main entrance for Aotea, that structure has been allowed to do a major development over that. So part of my team is working that on every site.
Yeah,
But
I was actually,
the nature, to answer the other part of your question, the nature of the project, and people talk about PPP projects for rail, and if you have a network that's appropriate for you, that is a working model, and those are successful around the world, where you have a brand new dedicated line, what you might call a metro line, where there is one operator working on one line, and the whole financing is set around the delivery model, where that operator succeeds or fails on the ability to run a rail service.